Should we get started,
Okay,
Rachel? Did you want
you
to?
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I could say a proper hello and welcome to this first CPD session hosted by Petersfield Climate Action Network. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel and I'm the education lead at PCAN. We do a lot of assemblies and workshops on environmental themes, and we're funded by the South Downs National Park and East Hants District Council, who are also funding this workshop here. But we wouldn't be here without Paul Perner. Now, Paul is a relentless campaigner for eco education and has been all the time I've known him. Currently works for the Ministry of Eco Education and is their education lead. Can't think of a higher position really, but that comes via being a prize winning geography lead, working for Sustrans, a UN accredited climate change teacher, and someone who truly practices what he believes in. He has a wealth of knowledge and he's so keen to share it with us. So, straight over to him with only the caveat that we are recording this. So, if you'd rather not be visible, then please change your name. Um, don't be on the camera, whatever. We will be able to send you a link afterwards if you would like a link to the recording, which will be hosted on the Ministry of Eco Education website. So over to Paul.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Uh, just so yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully this is going to be a really useful hour, maybe hour and a half. If you do need to come off the call, don't worry. Do just say bye. And as Rachel said, we're going to record this, and all of the things I reference we'll also send through in an email afterwards as well for you to sort of access and explore in your own time. You may well be quite an overwhelming hour, but hopefully you'll find yeah, some of it useful for you able to take back and fit into your setting. I think the other thing we're really keen to do as well is use this as an opportunity to share best practice as well. So if there are things that you're doing and you think actually it's worked really well for us, please do also share those during the call and in the chat. And I guess as questions come up, or if you've got any thoughts, please feel free to throw them into the chat, or we could take a moment and we can kind of discuss those things as well. So I'll just share my screen. As Rachel was just referencing there, I lead a charity called the Ministry of Eco Education, and we're a national organisation that has teachers across the country, and yeah, this type of CPD is something we do quite frequently. Let me just set up my screen if that's all right. Um, Great. Okay, so yeah, we're funded by the Green Britain Foundation, and that's something I might link into later as well. But also, Rachel mentioned the funders that have made this call happen and this training. So thank you so much to who was it, Rachel? It was the East Hants District Council and the South Downs National Park Authority as well. So the whole kind of premise around the climate nature education and kind of what's going on in schools can be quite overwhelming. And one of the places that we wanted to start, and we as an organization and a group of teachers have wanted to do, is help rationalize that picture. And there's loads of different ways that I'm going to represent that over the call and kind of piece this together. But I think this jigsaw is quite a useful one. So as a school, you're trying to grapple with lots of different competing priorities. And also, there's actually a kind of overwhelming amount of support from a variety of organizations. And so one thing that we're trying to position ourselves as the Ministry of Eco Education is to help create a logical framework. And we've done the kind of groundwork and the kind of research to be able to find all of that and bring it all together. And that's where we kind of hopefully come in as a kind of I guess a medium or a conduit to be able to then help point you in the right direction, and hopefully by the end of the call you kind of have a better understanding of that. But one way that we can break this down is we as a charity believe that the curriculum and the day-to-day lessons are fundamental to a school's kind of operation and what point of I guess schools are. And so, in order to be truly sustainable, we need to make sure that sustainability and the climate and nature crisis is woven throughout the curriculum. And of course, that can be quite a challenging kind of process because, again, there's so many different competing aspects of the curriculum. And also, the curriculum is something that's kind of co-created as a school community. There's also a lot of external pressures on the curriculum, including the national curriculum and what's expected from government. And I think one thing that we really try and emphasize is that actually, as practitioners, we can there's scope to be able to evolve that and to sort of we might use words like exploit or manipulate the curriculum in order to achieve the kind of aims that we might want to, and that's something as a school community that we can explore a bit more. There's also then things like climate action plans, and hopefully you've heard of those, and that's something that schools are increasingly being expected to produce. They're not yet mandatory, but that's something that will come in the next year or two. There's lots of organisations again that are helping support schools to create these climate action plans and can do audits and sort of baseline surveys. Some of those include Let's Go Zero with there's a national team of climate action advisors. But there's also charities like SOS UK, Students Organising for Sustainability, who have young people, again, who can kind of play that role in being climate action advisors and help support schools to create those. And there's also, of course, sort of more private organisations who can help schools to baseline their carbon emissions. We've also got aspects of outdoor learning that are fundamental to this, and a lot of schools have really championed Forest School, and there's the Forest School Association. But again, there's a real breadth of other organisations. Opal is another one of those, Learning Through Landscapes, who really have expertise in that. And so there's so much that you as teachers can benefit from all of these organisations, and actually, it's about sort of cherry picking the best of all of those sorts of things to help bring them and make them, I guess, appropriate for your setting. The other aspect of this is in order to make sustainability or to be truly sustainable, we need to make sure that we emphasize the local. And that's something that I guess schools have always done. We've localized our curriculum. We've thought about maybe a local river or a local place, and that might include field trips. But also, I think increasingly we're understanding that climate change has localized impacts. So if you're in an urban environment, it might be to do with heat because of a lack of trees. Or it might be if you're in a coastal environment that you concern more about flooding. So again, it's for the school to sort of think, okay, which of these aspects is appropriate for us within the local environment. I think we've also had some interesting encounters with schools who feel that they're in a particularly rural environment, and so they therefore feel that farming and food is a really important priority because of the links within their community. So it might be that those are the aspects that you emphasize or link into. I guess the other thing that I should prioritize, or sort of share and uh, share as a priority is the National Education Nature Park and the Climate Ambassadors Programme. And again, they're aspects of government funded projects that are free to access and support there for you as a school. And we'll maybe mention those again later on. But the premise or the idea of this is to essentially show you that this is a jigsaw. It's a complicated picture, but there is a wealth of expertise and organisations out there to support you. And I guess what we're trying to do is help rationalise that so that you as a school can make better use of that. Now, the key thing that we've created and sort of our expertise across the team have pulled together is all of the free resources and opportunities from hundreds of organizations. So as I was sort of describing that legwork that we've done, we've pulled them together. And what we've tried to do is bring them into a framework which kind of makes more sense for you as a school. Now, these are the seven key themes, and these we think are a really good lens to explore sustainability. Because again, that concept of sustainability can be a really complex one. So instead of just using it as a sort of meaningless word, we can instead think of these seven themes as being a way to explore sustainability and society and the world around us. And these actually are prioritized or ranked. And again, this is something that can often get a bit lost in schools, is actually transport, energy, and food make up 80% of our carbon emissions. And so if we were to really prioritize anything, it would be transport, energy, and food. Those are the things that we can have the greatest impact, both as a school community, but also in our own lives and wider society and communities. That fourth one as well, nature is often missed out. People become very fixated on carbon counting. And we should always ask that question, what about the impact on the rest of nature? And again, that links in with the school site. There's so much opportunity to re-nature, to rewild, and to bring also nature into the curriculum. And then society, waste, and water also kind of catch the rest of those sorts of themes. And actually, just in themselves, these seven key themes can be a useful framework to think, have we got a balanced curriculum? Are we exploring each of these, or do we do more of one thing than another? And we'll come back to that in a minute. We've got a useful framework that can help you to sort of almost tick these off and think if they're useful or not. Now, underneath each of these seven key themes, the way that we've created kind of useful resources is by framing series of lessons around big questions. And these are big, broad societal questions that we think all young people should be exploring. I guess it's also informed by wider academic research. So we've done a lot of work with, particularly the University of Sussex, but also a whole variety of other universities to kind of bring their research into what we're doing. And again, I think what we're trying to say is, as well as all these other organisations and charities that we're weaving together their resources and opportunities, we're also bringing together academic research and kind of weaving that across the curriculum to make it easier for you as teachers to be able to access that. Now, to really help bring to life what we've done, this is just an example of the variety of organisations that we've kind of pulled together, both in terms of their resources and wider opportunities and expertise. And actually, there's more than 200 organisations that we've got relationships with and that we're linking to their resources. And so when you access the website, the idea is it's designed to be inspiration. It's designed to sort of help direct you towards things that you might not have seen before. But equally, the big questions themselves might help inform some of your planning and think, oh, have we got a series of lessons that links to that? Or are we doing something similar and could we tailor it or kind of bring that question in to help inform it? Now, in terms of accessing the website, every single school in the country has got access to this, and the way that we've set it up is with their main school email address. So this is partly to make our lives easier so that when staff move on, we're not constantly kind of moving and creating new email addresses. This is there's a big database of all schools' contact details. And it's normally the email address that is on the school website. It's the kind of admin or office one. Sometimes it's occasionally the head teachers. But you should be able to find that. If not, I've sent an email to all of you with your email and then the password, because there's no private data in terms of this, it's actually the same for everyone. This is more just for us to track who is looking at the site and to be able to offer a bit more tailored support to them. So, um, after the call, we'll remind you of this, and you can go and have a look at this. And we will dig deeper into this during the call. But what I wanted to do was to start with a bit of a foundation, and this is something actually that I think is quite useful for teachers because people's knowledge can be relatively patchy. There can be some things that people know more about than others, but also it's useful to see how someone else might describe this, and it could inform some of your practice and how you communicate this, and also just to remind you of the key themes around the climate and nature crisis. So we can begin with planet Earth. Um, just maybe to get some interaction. Does anyone know how old planet Earth is in the chat? Would anyone like to have a guess? How old is planet Earth? Is it millions? Is it billions? Someone gonna have a go? Melanie, you're right. 4.5 billion years. Yeah, so planet Earth, 4.5 billion years. And it's very difficult for anyone really to comprehend how old the Earth is. But there is one way that we can kind of help visualize that, and that's if we were to stretch our arm out, and then from our shoulder to our fingers is that 4.5 billion years. Actually, most of the Earth's history, not much happened. And it was only until around the palm of our hand when interesting things like multicellular organisms were around. And then actually, it's the length of our fingernails that humans have existed. So humans have only existed hundreds of thousands of years, particularly in the way that we might think of them now. So life is, I guess, relatively new on planet Earth. But also the probability of life on Earth existing is a real fluke. So the idea that we have these key ingredients that make it possible for life to exist. And just in the chat, does anyone have a guess? What are some of the things that make it possible for life to flourish on planet Earth? People often talk about planet Earth as spaceship Earth because we're sort of traveling through space, and it's maybe a better way to think about life as a kind of a collection of humans rather than of countries. So Emma's thrown in, we've got water, H2O. Yeah, that's a key ingredient, and that's one actually that if we're looking for signs of life in on other planets or in other parts of the universe, we're looking for water in maybe frozen or evidence of water. And it's the orbit of the Earth that is really important. So we are the third planet from the sun. And it's that distance that means we're just right. And actually, planet Earth is often described as the Goldilocks planets. And that's a really good analogy for young people, is to think that they know really kind of well the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And you can ask them what happens. And they talk about Goldilocks going into this house and finding some chairs and some beds and some porridge. And some of that porridge is a bit too hot, some of it's a bit too cold. And then there's one bowl which is just right. And that's exactly how we can describe the Earth. It's the Goldilocks planet because it is just the right temperature. Now, one of the key ingredients for that is actually the blanket of gases that surrounds us, the atmosphere. And it's better to think of it as a blanket or a coat than a greenhouse, because actually the analogy of a greenhouse is a slightly false one. It doesn't actually behave quite like a greenhouse. So we can think of that layer of gases kind of keeping the earth nice and warm, trapping heat. And you can have a blow up. Actually, some of the people on this call have seen me do this. A blow up globe, and you can use this with young people. They can hold it, and you can throw one of their coats or jumpers over it, and then you can say, the sun is a ball of gas releasing energy out into space, and some of it is reflected off the Earth's surface, and some of it is absorbed by the Earth and then re-emitted, and that re-emitted radiation is actually of a different wavelength that is more likely to be trapped. It's a longer wavelength. So short wave comes kind of is released from the sun and reaches the earth, but when it's absorbed and re-emitted, it's long wave. That stuff's more likely to be trapped. What we're also then doing is humans found oil, coal, and gas, and by burning those things, we've added another layer of gases, or we've kind of increased the density of those gases or concentration of them. And so you can model that by having another jacket, throwing it on the ground, and then talking about it being dug up and burnt, and then releasing these other gases and adding to the greenhouse effect and trapping more of those gases. And then you can say to the students, well, if you were going to wear two coats all day, how would you feel? And they would turn around and say, hot. And then we can say, well, if you were too hot and you had two coats on all day, what would you do? How would you kind of get cool down? And the students would sort of say, take off a jacket. And then you can say, well, actually, it's not as easy for the Earth to do that. Yes, there are things in nature that remove carbon, but actually, the amount of greenhouse gases that we've put into the atmosphere and the rate at which we've put them in is so fast and kind of so high that we can't just plant trees to be able to suck that out. And so actually we need to maybe be more creative and think of other solutions or think about other things that we're doing. There's also a really good bathtub analogy, and what I will do is I'll link to that later because there's a good animation of that which talks about the atmosphere just like a bath, and with a tap running, which is releasing carbon dioxide into instead of a bath, it's into the atmosphere, and talking about what we would need to do to stop that carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere or water into the bath, and the idea that you need to turn off the taps. But that's another good analogy that we can use. Now, we just I jump onto the next really important part of this then, is thinking about the temperature change. And this again, some of you might have seen this, the warming stripes comes from Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading. Um, and this is a really useful teaching tool. This is actually a slightly more complex version. It shows you in a kind of bar graph instead of just simple lines. But those lines each represent a year, and the darker the blue, the colder, and the darker the red, the warmer. And you can see how kind of over the last well, temperature has been changing over the last 200 years, and the pivot there has been the Industrial Revolution. But you can really see the last few decades where the temperature has dramatically changed. And we keep breaking records. Last year was the warmest year on record, and actually, I think it was probably worth noting that we had the warmest 1st of May ever recorded, this 1st of May, and March was the sunniest in terms of ever recording. So, we keep breaking these records, and I think everyone's aware of this, and we experience this. And what's interesting is people will often talk about the weather and say, "Oh, isn't it nice?" And it's important to sort of challenge some of that behavior and remind people that this is completely out of the ordinary or the normal. The climate that we maybe grew up in doesn't exist anymore, and we've been shifting that. And not necessarily today, but the temperatures that we've been, the recent warm temperatures were up to about 10 degrees above the kind of normal average temperatures experienced during last month. Now, we have seen 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming as a global average change, but those sorts of numbers they're not particularly meaningful. There's no context to that. And so actually some of these numbers don't sound scary themselves. And that's something that's important to explore and to challenge, is that maybe those numbers just don't mean anything to young people in particular. And maybe we need to think about other ways to communicate them. Now, that temperature also then obviously relates to carbon dioxide concentrations, and the science of this we've known for hundreds of years. That increased concentrations of carbon dioxide trap more heat and make the world warmer. What we can see though is over the last 2,000 years, it was pretty stable, and that kind of led to a real kind of expansion of human civilization. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've seen a dramatic increase in carbon dioxide, and we can really see how dramatic it was when we look back over the last 800,000 years. And you can see those glacial and interglacial cycles where the world was getting warmer and colder and warmer and colder. But that was within quite a apologies. I think I something happened on Zoom there. I'm gonna just share my screen again. We'll get back to the story. Carbon dioxide. I think it's maybe a reminder to also move on. Uh, so we can see here that glacial and interglacial cycles, this relatively
Beg your
stable
pardon again.
period.
Oh, you're back.
Hi, Rachel. Sorry, yeah, no, I think something happened with Zoom, but I think
Yeah.
we're all back and fine. Um, But what you can see in this graph is particularly how dramatic the rate of change is. And if anything, that's the bit that we should be focusing on, is that the levels of carbon dioxide have never been this high in human history, and you'd have to go back millions of years to be able to find carbon dioxide at the same concentration it is today. And these are the sorts of things that maybe start to communicate that level of urgency and quite how dramatic the change is, because this line looks almost vertical. Now, beyond temperature and carbon, what's useful is actually to talk about how that impacts on our weather. And so we were talking earlier about temperatures and the sorts of changes in temperature that we've seen. But that 1.5 degrees Celsius change in global average nudges everything to the right, and you can see then it shifts the probability of extreme weather events. And that's the kind of language that we might use, is changes in the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events. So we get more likely to have warmer temperatures, more likely for those to prolonged. And actually, colder weather patterns are then less frequent, less likely to have snow, and those are the sorts of things that maybe mountainous regions, particularly in kind of the Alps, has witnessed. And as well as having an impact on temperature, this also has an impact on rainfall as well. So we get increased likelihood of extreme kind of rainfall events, really intense periods, and really kind of it sounds like a contradiction, but we also then have increases in drought, because what happens is that rainfall is there's a greater gap between when that rainfall happens. So we have really short, intense periods of rainfall, but that might be broken by maybe a month or something. And that's again something that we've been experiencing at the moment. What I should say as well is that all of what I've been saying here in terms of the link between extreme weather events and climate change is called climate attribution studies. And there's a really good website again that I'll link to afterwards, where you can explore extreme weather events and how climate change has changed the probability and intensity of those sorts of events. So the research around this is really well understood, and we can now link really localized extreme weather events with climate change. Now, the other part of this jigsaw, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that often gets forgotten, is the aspect of nature, and particularly our relationship with the rest of nature. So humans have developed this lifestyle where we're really detached from nature. And some of anecdotally, we kind of talk about buying food now, not even from a supermarket. You might just do it from touching some buttons on an app. So people's experience of where their food comes from is really detached and distant. And we don't really understand kind of how it might have been grown or where it came from. And there's so many other aspects of life, particularly jumping on a plane, which again makes us feel like we're completely separate from the rest of nature. But actually, what we, particularly as educators, need to do is recenter young people so that they understand that they are part of nature, just as much as maybe the bugs that no longer get splattered on the front of a car, or if you find a snail wandering along, you can talk about how actually they're just as important as we are as humans. And so our relationship with nature is something that's really important to explore and discuss. And again, that can lead into the way that we teach and to lessons in terms of the way that we might frame nature, not as a resource that can be kind of exploited, but instead as something that we need to value just as much a part of life. And I guess it leads into our kind of ideas of the economy and society and politics, because we often talk about GDP and economic growth as if it's this sort of detached entity, rather than understanding that nature is fundamental to all of that. And we can't have, the economy wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the rest of nature. Now, the diagram on the right brings to life how we've affected ideas of wild nature. Yeah, it shows you mammal biomass, and actually only 4% of all global mammal biomass is wild now. And it's only over the last sort of 100 years that this has dramatically changed. Most of the mammals on Earth now are cows, and this is all to do with our diets and the way that I guess increasing living standards has shifted people's diets towards increasingly eating meat. And there's obviously a link between carbon dioxide emissions and also use of land and water and resource, again, that links to all of these. And you know, I guess food can often be seen as a challenging concept to explore with young people. It can often be seen as controversial or I guess particularly linked to people's identity and choice. But there are some really fundamental ideas that we should be looking to explore. And I know that Pecan organised a screening of 6 Inches of Soil, which is a really good documentary which explores some of these themes. There's also Kiss the Ground is another good one. But again, there's lots of really great resources and videos that are out there that help you as educators kind of bring some of these ideas to young people. Now, the very last one I'm going to touch on in this 5 minute summary is the idea of climate justice. And again, many people will say this is a fundamental idea that it's also a really important starting point. And we'll come back to the idea of kind of individual versus collective action. But what this really exemplifies is that when we talk about climate change being caused by humans, it's not actually most humans. It's a very small group of people, particularly through history. We can think about the richest 10% of people on Earth making up 52% of carbon emissions. And to be in the top 10% richest people on Earth, you only need to earn median income in the UK, which is £26,500. So, people on median income in the UK are in the top 10% richest people. And what that maybe helps illustrate is how our lives are quite different to the most people on Earth. And we can start to think about ideas of global South and the global majority. And I think this is also a really interesting idea as an educator to try and challenge young people's perceptions that their lives are normal and that everyone lives like them, and actually to start to unpick that and show them how most people don't have access to a car in the way that we do. They don't have the same sort of access to energy or food or water. And it's the poorest 50% or 4 billion people on Earth that actually have only ever produced 7% of carbon dioxide emissions. And we can say, well, actually, if we were to share that cake equally, if you had to divide it up and give everyone an equal piece, it might be that we would say, actually, those people should be allowed to emit more carbon dioxide. And it's the very richest in society who need to radically decarbonize their lifestyles. So it might be that you think, well, actually, some of these ideas are quite challenging to explore, particularly with the primary audience. But that idea of fairness is quite kind of something that very young children can grasp, and you can start to bring these ideas in. And what I will do though is just also link. There's a really useful quiz that we created to test your knowledge, and it's based on a crowdsourced, I guess, book, or online book called Emergency on Planet Earth. And this, I think, is a really useful kind of go-to if ever you're thinking of, I've got this really challenging question or a bit of information I need to find out. Where can I find it? Well, this was put together by some scientists, and it's all peer reviewed, and it links through. to lots of the kind of most up-to-date research. And this quiz is a way to sort of a fun way to explore that. There's 20 questions and you can see how well you do. And this also links though because now for the second year there's been a Levers survey or climate test with year 11 students. And it's been a relatively small proportion. It was initially, or last year, led by Ipsos Mori with the Royal Meteorological Society, and it's now this year being led by the Royal Meteorological Society. And that's actually anything, it's a survey that anyone can access. And again, I'll link through to that after the call, and you can use that as a tool to sort of play with your students and see how good their knowledge is. Or equally, these sorts of things are quite useful to share across the staff room and to sort of see how good it's about a conversation, isn't it? It's not about sort of testing people in that way, but instead to start the conversation. Okay, so we're going to come back to some of those themes. I appreciate we've been going for about half an hour now. I wanted to just give you a bit of the context then behind the Ministry of Eco Education, and also partly to share a kind of what maybe makes us a bit different or special to other people and where we're trying to come from, I guess. And so much of who and what we are is about this person, Dale Vince. So Dale funds the Ministry of Eco Education. But he in himself has got a really interesting story, and that's something that's I guess quite useful to share with young people as well. Because Dale is someone who has made millions. He's a very successful person in that sense financially, and he's made that by selling renewable energy. So he owns Ecotricity, which is UK's greenest energy company. But actually, he started his journey as a new age traveller and got involved in renewables through the Glastonbury music festivals. He's since then kind of championed lots of causes. He also owns the greenest football club in the world called Forest Green Rovers, which is based over near Bristol. We were fortunate to host a live lesson from Forest Green Rovers. So there's some really good video content that explores how Forest Green Rovers are sustainable, and there's a student booklet as well that goes along with that. And what we have found is that using football as a vehicle to talk about sustainability is a really useful way to hook people who maybe stereotypically wouldn't or don't naturally gravitate towards this. And we've definitely found this experience when we've talked about this with young people, young boys. As soon as a football club's mentioned, they sort of pique their interest and think, oh, well, actually, if a football club's doing this, maybe this is something that we could do. And again, as a school community, this is something to say, well, there is a football club doing this. Why couldn't we do this ourselves? And so the videos a really good resource to be able to show how it can be done. There's also some other ridiculous things that Dale is doing. One of them is he's making the world's most sustainable diamond by sucking carbon out of the sky, turning it using renewable energy into lab-grown diamonds. That's based over near Bristol as well. And then another recent one is he's funding the UK's first electric airline. But all of these are sort of stories of innovation and progress, and they link to ideas of careers and green skills to show that there are people doing this. And Dale is one example. There's hundreds of these sorts of organizations and companies where you can really bring this to life and show how it's relevant for young people and links to them. Now, as an organization, we've got a vision that all schools in England, the education system educates for a green future, with the idea that sustainability and the climate nature crisis is woven throughout. And that's, I guess, what we're doing, supporting teachers to be able to do that. But the way that we're doing it is by helping to amplify all of the stuff that already exists and helping to really rationalize and present that to teachers in a way which is useful and easy, rather than sort of that overwhelming sense of, gosh, this is another group of people and another organization and approach. There's a whole variety of ways that we do that. Ideally, we're trying to help inspire and motivate people and work with people who really are passionate about this. We're curating these resources into something that we think is a useful framework. I guess then broader than that, we're offering professional development. We're also helping to catalyze partnerships, sharing best practice. So again, I've sort of mentioned that, there'll be a point in a moment where if there's something you think you do really well, we can kind of share and talk about that. And ultimately, we're trying to connect the classroom and the learning experience, and I guess that real sense of, well, this is happening and let's acknowledge it. Um, okay, let's jump on to the next bit. Uh, What I also, sorry, wanted to do was just give you an idea of some of what we as an organisation have been doing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the approach in a second, but just to give you the overview, we offer staff training in person as well as these sorts of online events. We've got loads of resources online again that we'll kind of share with you. But ultimately, the reach of what we've done over the last 3 years now, we're supporting or engaged with teachers in more than 11,000 schools, and so ultimately kind of having an impact on millions of young people in terms of people really being kind of understanding and acknowledging this in their teaching. And as I sort of said, the website is the heart of what we've got, and we've got more than 60 of these sorts of big questions that weave together all of these sorts of resources. Um, we've got a lot of online events and panel discussions. Most recently, we hosted one around food and should schools go 100% plant-based. There is a national plant-based schools campaign which has just started, and there's momentum building there to sort of really lobby government to change the school food standards and also just improve the variety and options available for school food. And there's some really interesting stories around schools who've come together as cooperatives and been able to then bring in local farmers and producers, or found alternative ways to be able to provide that kind of catering. Um, we do also do some things student focused as well, particularly that's around live lessons. In the next few months, we've got a live lesson coming from a big event in London. Now, just to get a bit more into the support that we offer, we talked earlier about that regional or kind of local focus. And what we've done is worked with every single local authority in the country to be able to pull together this more localized approach. And so there is a Hampshire document, and we've kind of talked to a variety of people across Hampshire County Council, but also in borough and district councils. And these documents are again meant to be inspiration for you as teachers. They're broken down into 7 key themes with the idea that, you know, within your teaching, you might be looking for other opportunities to be able to pull in another organisation or to link in a field trip. Or, and again, it's just a way to make sure you've not missed anything or that something else might pique your interest. So again, I'll link through to that in some of what we follow up with. The other one then to point towards is our YouTube channel. And we've done all sorts of things, including calls from people who've been at COP conferences, but also we've got a series of micro CPD videos where we talk to academics, experts, all kinds of people in short 10-15 minute interviews with the idea that you as a teacher can watch those and kind of really quickly gain an understanding of those bits of knowledge. The other thing that we've done as an organisation is quite a bit of political engagement. Um, so we've kind of met with Sadiq and done a lot with London in terms of the boroughs and the Greater London Authority. We also recently hosted Stephen Morgan, who's the kind of deputy in terms of the Education Secretary and the Department for Education. And we also hosted Bridget Phillipson in the past as well. So we're trying to do that lobbying from kind of the top down as well as I guess the bit that we're really putting most of our effort in is that from the ground up and really helping to support teachers. And we do have a team nationally. Nirvana is based over in the southeast towards London. I've got myself, we've got Hannah up in the Midlands and Meryl up in the north. Each of us have specialisms as well. So Hannah is an early years practitioner, Meryl's a science teacher, my background is geography, Nirvana is in the alternative kind of home education provision. And so across the team, we really hope that we kind of bring a bit of expertise. And the other bit I wanted to also touch on is we really offer a kind of tailored curriculum advice service as well. And what we try and do with our network is, people send us a scheme of work or say they're particularly interested in a certain area, and then we sort of link that up with experts within our network to really help give you advice. Now, I did promise 3 steps, and we are going to get to those 3 steps, and hopefully that'll be the bit that you can really then start to think how this links to your context in your own school. I wanted to first complicate everything again and say, okay, we've got all of these big questions and we've got these learning journeys that bring together the resources of lots of different organizations. But what we've also done is tried to create a more holistic whole school journey. And again, this comes from our experience working with schools that this can be a bit overwhelming, and people can think, okay, where do I start, or what do I do first? So what we've done is pulled together third-party resources from lots of other organisations into a five-step journey. But I think it's those first three that are the really important ones. And the first one is all around kind of surveying the staff. Teaching body and the wider staff community, exploring people's expertise and interests, exploring with young people their kind of understanding of sustainability and the climate and nature crisis, and ultimately then coming up with a joint plan. And that might begin also with having shared or common language and linking it into maybe wider aims within the school. So the first thing that I think, if you haven't done this already, it's worth kind of reaching out, particularly this time of year, to the school's senior leadership, is coming up with an agreed definition of what you mean by sustainability and making sure that everyone within the school community understands what the climate and nature emergency or crisis is. And it might be that you do an assembly or you invite someone like Rachel from Pecan to be able to give that context around the temperature and the carbon kind of picture so that everyone feels that sense of urgency. Because as much as we've got kind of all these competing priorities, it's important for us to recognize that this is fundamental to so many of those and it underpins them and also can link through to them. And again, that's a way that you within your school community can really help make this happen is by linking it to other school aims and particularly any that you might have in writing that are your kind of your agreed school in your development plan. And if it's not in this year's, if you can add an aspect of sustainability into your development plan for next year, or it might be that it links with your personal development as a teacher. And if you can explicitly have this in writing, it then gives more weight to this and the emphasis of this and allows you to be able to kind of rally the rest of the school community in order to achieve this. As I said earlier, that transport, energy, food, nature, society, waste, and water is a really useful framework to be able to explore that holistic element of sustainability, and then also, yeah, underpinning it with that climate and nature crisis. Now, the second step on the journey is then thinking about mapping your existing curriculum, because actually, I was going to say you might be surprised, but we've definitely been surprised when we've gone and visited schools that so much of this is across multiple aspects of the school curriculum, and that teachers of all subjects or year groups are already doing aspects of this. So what we've done is we've pulled together a couple of useful tools to be able to map this. And it could be a shared document, it could be a shared spreadsheet. And what we've also done is embedded the seven key themes so that you can start to tally how many of those different themes you're touching on. And as we said, it might be that you do loads around waste or you do loads around transport, but you do very little on one of the other topics. And it allows you to then think about covering all of those sorts of bases and bring more balance. What it also does is it brings buy-in from the whole school community. These are the sorts of things that you could share this document with heads of department or heads of year or with subject leads, and they can input across the curriculum where they think sustainability sits. Now, obviously, that first step is important because they need to understand what we mean by sustainability and what the climate nature crisis is, and then that will allow them to be able to signpost these things. But this is a good starting point to then be able to build on. And it allows you to start thinking about opportunities that you can then exploit and develop, and things that you can start to link together. Because it's also the way that we really amplify this and make it a really effective process is by ensuring that everyone's talking to each other and that it's all linked up, that it's a sort of holistic picture. And I guess this also links through to some of those wider operational elements of sustainability. So it might be with the school's business manager that they already are looking at solar panels or where they get their energy from. What I would say is that the one thing a school can, the biggest thing a school can do to reduce its carbon emissions is by shifting to 100% renewable energy provider, which is not often the easiest thing to do. It might involve waiting to the end of a contract or to renegotiate something. But those sorts of things around the operations of the school they're things that need to be or should be linked into the wider curriculum. They're learning opportunities. And again, it's through this mapping that you can start to then pinpoint and link those sorts of things in. It could be around school's energy, it could be around water, it could be around the school sites, it could be around transport and how young people get to and from school. We When you start to look at some of the big questions, we've got some that explore how young people get to and from school and link out to organisations like Sustrans and Living Streets and those sorts of things. But it all kind of comes back to this document as being a really useful tool to be able to start framing it. And then you can build on this. And it could then be that you start to pull in other big questions or get inspired by some of the other framework and resources and opportunities that we'll pull together and weave them into your existing curriculum. I guess the other thing I should say at this moment is there's obviously a curriculum and assessment review going on. And again, I kind of alluded to that. We are doing engagement with the Department for Education around lobbying for a greater emphasis on climate and nature and sustainability. The sort of I guess the tone coming from the Department for Education is yes, that there's lots of people calling for this, and that there will be a greater emphasis. So I guess the thing I always say to teachers when I go visit them is, I guess you're getting ahead of the curve, or you will be better prepared than other people when you will then have to be doing this next year or the year after. And also, I would say that motivation of why you might do this, kind of the beginning of what I set out on this call, hopefully really helps people to understand that urgency and the moral imperative of why you might do this, rather than sort of going back to, well, I just sort of do what I'm told from the government. And I think we all recognise the importance of this in kind of the present, but also in kind of creating a better future. Okay. So, step three of the journey is having some sort of launch event and trialing some of a slightly different approach. Some of these maybe these big questions and learning journeys. And the way you might do that is by hosting an eco day. And again, we've pulled together support to cover that base as well. And it could be that you link with something like Science Week. I think that was maybe a month or two ago, but we've also got things like Earth Day. There's always an opportunity that you can jump on and help it feel relevant to the world and to the school community. And then that Eco Day can also be a doorway. It can be a way that people are forced to have a look at their curriculum and to look at the framework and resources that we've got on the Ministry of Education website. What we recommend to schools is they could do a collapsed timetable day where each year group or each subject take a different question, and then they use some of the resources and some of the opportunities that we've pulled together, and at the end of the day, they have some outcome. There's something they can share, and it could be, many schools host parents, and they host some sort of event where they then show that off and involve the wider school community. But what that also does is it opens up people's eyes to what's possible, and then other teachers start to think, okay, well, actually, it's relatively easy to do this, and how can we link it into other things that are already existing in other series of questions? And yeah, it may be that in order to begin this journey, what you also do is look for I was going to say easy wins, but things that overlap, or it could be that you've already got a series of questions around plastic. And so you could look at we've got a series of questions exploring, do we live on a plastic planet? And you could think, okay, are there any resources that I find interesting or ones that I've not heard of that you could then also link into what you're already doing? Another common one, particularly at primary, is exploring tourism. And we've got one that is framed around the idea of can we all fly, looking at who flies, like how frequently, looking at ideas of ecotourism. And so what we've tried to do is make sure that the particularly at primary, the national curriculum is covered, and what we've done is almost thrown it up in the air and it's framed around an environmental lens. So there's always a way that it kind of links in to your national to the national curriculum. Now, um, what I'm keen to do now is take a moment for people to ask questions, or for us to sort of share a bit of best practice, and then we can come back together and I'll highlight a few other takeaways. Um, so if you've got a question, please do feel free to put it into the chat. Otherwise, you can maybe raise your hand if you wanted to come onto the video.
Well, I'm going to throw out there my experience when I was a primary teacher, and I got permission to host a green day at school. So this was pre-COVID, but the SLT weren't really on board. In fact, they told me to have it on a day when the deputy head, were going to be out of the school on some other course. We had the most fantastic day, and it was brilliant. But the take up by the SLT just didn't happen after it. So I've got to say, that first stage of the consultation and making people understand why it's important, the whole group within your school is really important for something that's actually going to be, dare I say it, sustainable within the school curriculum.
I think what you're maybe also alluding to there is it's important to share responsibility and to involve the wider school community that, it may be that many people on this call, they are the champion. They're the person who really spearheads this. And hopefully other people, I know I might try and get Emma to talk a bit more about this, um, by finding other people within the school community who have interests in certain areas that you can orchestrate and pull together, and then you act more as the person weaving it together, whilst other people are helping to kind of deliver that, makes it sustainable. Because otherwise, as you say, kind of it's not sustainable in itself. Emma, did you want to share any of your experiences? Emma is a primary teacher up at Bentley.
Hello. That's a very hazy camera. Um, yeah, is there something with relation to what I do at school, or maybe young ACAN would be useful?
Well, maybe both. Do you want to start though, maybe with you? You are on this journey, and I wondered if you had some tips for people in terms of kind of how you've been able to make things happen. What have been some of the things that you've had to unlock within the school community that has allowed other things to develop?
I think certainly within the school community, I think if you can get the children on board, they tend to bring everybody along with them through their enthusiasm. So I'm very conscious. I'm a part-time teacher. I am the sustainable champion person who's passionate about the environment and probably always have been when I've been working in school. And I think it's yeah, I think if you can get the children involved, so we have an eco council that, we've worked on eco schools, we've got 2 awards, and we meet regularly, and empowering the children, I think that really, really gets staff on board. So that's one way I get everybody on board. Also, just trying to keep everybody updated with what's going on. So communication, I think, is really, really vital. It's quite tricky when you only work sort of pretty part-time, but where I can, I sort of lead staff meetings or parts of inset days and just make sure that it's always there on the agenda. So I think that's, yeah, certainly, but I think getting kids involved and empowering them, and in turn, what I'm finding is that the children then start to drive a girl in year 6 who's just, she's the lead of the Eco Council, and she wants to drive a project to reduce electricity consumption because when I shared the action plan and shared our carbon footprint, she could see that electricity was an issue in the school, use of electricity, and she's keen to get it down. So I'm now working with Hampshire. I can't remember what the acronym is for the energy provider, but they've now given me access to our basically our I can't remember what it's called. It shows you all the graphs. It tells you how much electricity we're consuming. So we're going to look at that, and perhaps she's keen to sort of lead a project. So I think definitely, yeah, if you can get the children involved, and then you'll find that they will then start to lead, and which is great when you're not in school all the time,
Mm.
which
I
I
think
think.
one thing we try and really emphasize is to move beyond also that kind of eco group, that kind of self-selecting group of people, that if you can weave this into the curriculum, it involves
Mm,
all young people, and that helps amplify the involvement. In terms of energy, one of the statistics that's often talked about is on average, 60% of a school's energy consumption happens outside of school hours. And that most of it is evenings and weekends and holidays. And so I think a business manager there is would probably pick up if you could say we could save more than half of our electricity bill just by being a bit better in terms of how we might manage our energy. Equally, the management of schools' energy is quite a challenging one. I've often visited schools where windows are open, heating's on, because it's not easy
mm.
to turn it off. It's kind of on indefinitely.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think what you were saying about sort of the getting involved with the business manager, I think having a good relationship with them, because I think they're the one that makes all the spending choices. They're the ones with the budget, and I think a lot of change in schools can be driven by budget. I mean, we're currently working in our network of schools to employ a new caterer, because obviously Hampshire, the catering is going to change. And so I've worked with all the children, gave an assembly, we talked about it, and then worked with the Key Stage 2 children to sort of come up with their ideas, what they would like to see on the menu, and that then got fed back to prospective caterers. So the head gave a presentation based on what the children had said that they would like to see on the menu. So I think going back to what you were sort of saying about getting people involved, getting the children, but just involving the whole school community. I also do eco updates on our newsletters as well, so that parents, I mean, whether they read it is another thing.
It's definitely
Um,
worth doing. I think maybe also what you're touching on there, Emma, is there's multiple reasons why you might do this and think that it's important to do it. One of them is saying, well, in terms of subject knowledge, knowing and understanding this is a really important thing, because otherwise things are happening in the world and young people kind of are oblivious to it, or if anything, they're open to misinformation and disinformation because they haven't been formally kind of taught and explored this. That aside, though, there's the soft, or maybe it's not the best term to use, but those other kind of skills and experiences. And the climate, nature, and sustainability is an opportunity to be able to develop so many other aspects that I think you kind of are referencing there
mm,
around collaboration, kind of critical thinking. I guess there's like problem solving, there's aspects of communication and presentation, and that by using this as a vehicle to be able to develop those, that's another reason to really lean in this. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that, Anna?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, as a school, we deliver sort of. I mean, we're on the right at the start of the Ministry of Eco Education journey. We sort of delivered it, and then sadly, member of staff left, but we're at the start of that. But we have for a number of years been doing eco lessons, which I've been sort of delivering. Which have been linked with our work with the Eco Schools project, or currently it's sort of we've come up with our own action plan. We've done that for a couple of years, and now we know what we're doing. And next year it will be our climate action plan that we're sort of currently writing. Um, so one of the things that the children have, you know, looked at, we looked at the butterfly emergency last year, and we looked for a solution for that. And then they've come up with the idea of having a pollinator garden. And again, getting the children involved, we had a competition, and the children were then able to design the garden, and now they're working on making the garden, making those choices. So it's giving that responsibility. And when you're talking earlier on about careers, and one of the children there kind of thinks, oh, this might be something I'd like to do as a career, to be a garden designer. And even at primary you can start having those conversations with the children. But certainly I think getting them involved in all aspects of the climate action and nature and everything is so important, and they absolutely love it. That's the other thing. It's
Mm.
they are really passionate, and teachers will always anecdotally will always sort of say that this is the area that really gives the children a real spark. And
That's also, I guess, one of the driving forces for us in terms of the way that we've created these learning journeys is to say it gives real motivation and interest because we're making it dynamic and kind of drawing on resources that are in themselves kind of interesting, also because it's real world. So you're removing that aspect of kind of hypothetical learning. There's always those sorts of stories of maths being taught in a really hypothetical and what could be perceived as boring, and young people go, why am I having to learn about this? And well, actually, there's some great resources from people like the Marine Conservation Society that looks at species in the ocean and uses that to count and count in like tens and all sorts of things. So, if you can pull on those, it helps also with young people's interests and motivations. Emma, the other bit I'm really keen to hear a bit about as well is all of your how this links with that forest school aspect and how you can kind of make that into a meaningful relationship with the wider curriculum. And before you touch on that as well, I also just wanted to reference there's a really good example of a school down in Portchester called Wicker Primary School that I'm sure everyone, particularly in Hampshire, but maybe in the wider community, has heard of as well. But they're a great example of how you can embed this across the curriculum. And a lot of what they've created is available on their website, and you can explore that. And actually, we've been and visited and created some video content as well. So they could be another example. And I guess that also links to this idea that there isn't one way to do this and there isn't necessarily like a right way. It's what's appropriate to you as a school community and
mm,
you, I guess, also as an individual, that we've all got our own interests. And what's really important is that you play to your strengths and your interests and where that might lead is different to someone else. And it doesn't mean it's wrong or it's right. It just means that's what's appropriate for you. Because I think again, kind of leaning on what Rachel was saying earlier, that sense of really making it sustainable, it needs to be something that you're interested in pursuing and kind of pushing energy with. And I guess what I would say as well is we increasingly know that having this as something that you're involved with can also be a real kind of, I guess, a break from other aspects of people's jobs and can help people to stay motivated. So we've found that in teachers as well, that they find this, and I'm sure looking at the other people on this call, that this helps give you energy in terms of the rest of your role. And as much as it might be frustrating and you might not quite achieve what you want to do, it's maybe the thing that keeps you in teaching. And that's also something that's really important to recognize. Um, Emma, I'll throw it back to you though, forest school bits.
yeah, so I trained as a forest school leader three or so years ago, and we do it in our school. It's quite a small part of what we do, but a really important part, and definitely one of the selling points. So the head will always reference it, sort of, year R meetings and that sort of thing. So we enable all the children to get out once a year for a block of sort of 6 or so weeks of sort of forest school. It sounds really small, it's an hour, but actually in that hour, the impact of that on the children is quite, so they have an hour a week for about sort of 6 weeks or half a term. But it has definitely become part of the ethos of the school and the culture. And it's during those sessions that you can really talk to the children about why it's important to look after nature. I mean, I will live by the David Attenborough sort of quote about, you won't want to protect what you don't care about, and that is at the heart of what I do. It's getting the children to care, but to be passionate about it as well. I think we have to, children are overwhelmed with things that make them go wow, to the point they're almost immune to those things. And I kind of think if you're out in nature, you almost have to make a worm really exciting. But if you do that, you model that to the children, then they suddenly think, oh, okay, perhaps this is a really cool thing. So I think, it is a really small part of what we do at school, but actually it definitely has an impact on the children. And I would say for the majority of the kids, they are pretty nature loving children and want to care and protect it. So,
Yeah, because I guess that takes time to develop and foster. It doesn't happen instantly.
no.
Maybe one of the things teachers might say is, um, how do you help young people overcome that novelty of being outside or doing things in a slightly different way? There are lots of schools that are particularly um I was going to say militant, but that's probably the wrong term, in terms of desks and learning and the formality of learning and the idea that you might take young people
Mm.
outside and experience nature. Uh, How have you found that transition?
I think we're lucky because we live in, the school is rural, so we have woodlands that the children have always accessed. So they're used to being outside. It's not a strange thing. We set it up because of COVID, because after COVID, children were quite scared to be outside, particularly in the woodlands. They hadn't been there for a long time, and they were a little bit nervous about it. So it was partly set up to sort of overcome that. Children definitely not scared to be outside. They absolutely love being out in our school woodland, and we're really, really lucky. But I know schools where they do it in a corner of a field, or there's always a space that you can get children outside. It doesn't have to be a woodland, and there's lots of things that you can do. But yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm the passionate person that went, on my own back and trained myself, got myself trained. But there's lots of ways that you can get children outside. And I know Hampshire have got guidelines and things that you can, and they run courses that you can get the children outside without being necessarily forest school trained. And like you said, the National Education Nature Park, there's amazing resources
Yeah.
from there, and lots of the resources that you will use,
I was going to say that
RHS.
maybe there's a moment to talk a bit more about that, the Education and Nature Park. So the premise of that is it's the Royal Horticultural Society and the Natural History Museum have sort of partnered up. There are resources on their website to help map your school site, and the whole premise being that you involve young people in doing that using GIS to be able to go about, and you either do that with an aerial photograph and you can kind of draw the different areas of the school site. And then it's starting to do things like biodiversity mapping and biodiversity surveys, but with the whole premise that if you add up all of the school sites across the UK, it adds up to an area twice the size of Birmingham. So there's a real great potential in renaturing school sites that stereotypically have been tarmacked, I guess, a bit of grass, and in terms of their biodiversity, hasn't necessarily been as good as it could be. But there are examples where biodiversity kind of is expanding, developing, and they're particularly things like the Wildlife Trust, the Tree Council. There's a massive list of organisations that offer free trees, free fruit trees. Is that something, Emma, that you've taken up?
We've started. I think we were probably slightly ahead of the game because we did it the other way round. We'd already had a nature reserve that we'd worked on before it started. So we've not done the mapping. We've kind of done things without the mapping, which to show the progress. So we've done it in a backward kind of way. But there are areas that we do need to sort of definitely map, like the playground, for example. The children are really keen, but again, their resources are, really, really good. We sort of signed up sort of right at the start, and it's got easier. Then they're very good at responding to people's difficulties. So the initial way of mapping the site was quite tricky, but they've changed that now, so it's a lot easier to map your site.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, and they do sort of really good CPD and everything. So I would, if people haven't already signed up, I definitely recommend it. And it fits in with obviously it's the DFE sustainability strategy, isn't it? It's all part and parcel of that with the climate action plans and things.
What I'll also signpost that to, and maybe we'll bring Rachel in a second as well with this, is there are so many grants, particularly around things like improving the biodiversity of school sites. The one I'll just throw in, there's the Southlands Trust. I've got one around, is it the 75th anniversary of the Southlands National Park? But that's just one example
Mm.
of grants or kind of small pots of money that are available, and that having a map of the school site is a really useful tool to be able to then to kind of show how you can improve the biodiversity and link these things in. And local climate action groups that are spread out kind of across the country can help with that, Rachel. I wondered if that's something that you wanted to mention.
Yeah, I mean, we don't um, acquire grants on behalf of schools and then dole them out, but we can certainly point you in the direction of grants that are available locally. In terms of the mapping, that's something that I've been working with the school to do exactly that. We've a new head teacher who's very keen on permaculture ethics. slightly surprisingly. So we've been mapping the school grounds with the basis of planet care, people care, and fair shares, and that's sort of really started to take off around the school. But the head in question has her finger on the pulse of every sort of grant going. So I think there are plenty of small pots out there for smallish things.
I wondered, Rachel, is there anything else you wanted to mention from that kind of more local perspective? The thing that strikes with me is that I think many teachers are unaware of the local expertise and that there's often far more within the local community that can be drawn on. And it could be
Yeah, I
from
think
I know we've got a lot of the kind of nature aspects, but I know that we've worked with schools where there's been people in the school community linked to fashion, and then that led to parents coming in, both maybe with businesses, but also just independently, and help run some fashion kind of upcycling workshops that then link to a fashion show. Um, so yeah, maybe that bit.
so. We've done some work on sustainable skincare ideas for teenagers. Um, the nature thing, I think that's underused actually. We are Pecan, for instance, has an ecologist who is going around schools with head teachers, pointing out things that are good and things that are not so good and things that could happen, and it can be as simple as that. So that, alongside a mapping of your site, can be really helpful. And certainly, as far as Pecan goes, we sort of see ourselves as well. If we don't know the answer, and if we haven't got the person who knows the answer, we will know a person who can help. So if you have a climate action group near you, I'm sure they're an excellent first sort of point of contact in terms of finding new people who can help on the journey.
Yeah, definitely. So before I kind of wrap up and do a bit of a summary, I wondered if there were any other questions from anyone else. Um,
I ask,
yeah,
I'll
sorry.
leap in with an early one here. Um, Something that I always found and still find really difficult is that balance when you're talking to young people, particularly primary, though I think that's just because I work more with primary children, is that balance between expressing the urgency of the situation and giving them the scary sort of statistics and not scaring the pants off them, to be frank. And I wondered if you had any resources that would help with that. I know there is no good answer because it is enough to scare the pants off anybody. But in terms of how you approach that with children,
Yeah, so I guess the one that comes to mind is there's the Climate Psychology Alliance, who've got some really good resources that support I guess it's a phrase I'm slightly reluctant to use, but ideas of anxiety. Uh, a kind of a theme that some young people might experience. But there's definitely someone called Caroline Hickman and also Louise Edgington who've done some lots of work to create guides and video content that's useful for teachers to understand how they can communicate in ways that doesn't kind of exacerbate those sorts of things, or equally when young people present those sorts of things, how we can kind of engage with that in a meaningful way. One of the strongest themes of all of those sorts of things is drawing on our emotional response and giving space within the learning process and within a school to talk about people's emotions. Because often, I know from secondary settings, it's often that's the thing which there's not enough time, it's rushed, or it's left to someone else within a kind of PSHE or tutor program. But instead, when we're exploring what can be very challenging ideas, it could be in a geography or a science lesson. What's important is to also give an opportunity for young people to talk about how that makes them feel, and for people to express themselves rather than kind of shutting those things away. The other really strong strand of this, which I think we've kind of alluded to but not made explicit, is that sense of being action orientated. So as much as you might present the urgency and the reality of this, you then also make sure that you show this is how you, as a kind of active citizen, as a young person within society, can have a positive impact, and these are things that you could do, and to give those opportunities within the school environment, but also to link in the wider community. So yes, it is very important to make sure that we don't just end on the doom and gloom and go, oh, isn't it all terrible and the world's going to end? But instead to say, and it could be using examples. So as I was talking about Forest Green Rovers, it could be that you just simply communicate examples of how things are that positive news. And actually, that's one thing that we've been doing with the Ministry of Eco Education is every Saturday morning we do something called Eco Ed News, and we draw on a couple of good news stories to make sure that as a teaching community we don't get bogged down in that doom and gloom of thinking it's all going wrong and there's nothing positive. And we've got on our Instagram channel we kind of share some, or we signpost to the good things that have happened during the week. So yeah, that's definitely an important part of this as well.
I agree completely on the giving space and action. And I think that it's that sort of action that takes even primary children into a more political sphere of writing letters and seeing what response comes back. And also maybe touching on a bit of craftivism, making something to send to a politician that will come back. And the other thing that I try to major on is the ability of young people to use their voice, that even if they just go home and have a conversation or talk about it with their friends, who's the one person you're going to share this with today? And that, I think, gives them an instant action to take, which, it's not going to ameliorate the big scaries, but it gives them something to take
Yeah.
away that isn't just the scary
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, because I think it's that sphere of influence, isn't it? And for a young person, it may be sort of their family setting, it may be the people they interact with, but that then is what they have an ability to influence and to engage with, and it's important to acknowledge that. Oh, I was going to just respond to something else you were saying there as well, Rachel. Um, what was it you were just saying?
Political engagement,
Oh
craftivism.
yes, that was it. So sorry. Really important strand as well is from our perspective, schools for far too long have individualized this and talked about kind of individual actions. And what's really important is to, yes, acknowledge those sorts of things, but to move beyond that as well and to say the way that we affect real change is through collective action and being a community. Schools are the perfect community for this to kind of begin and be fostered, partly because there's an expert in a teacher and an educator who's really good at engaging in relationships and conversation and bringing knowledge in and sort of framing that. But also, young people are connected into the wider community through, their wider families. So when you're educating people, you're not just educating the children in front of you, you're also having an influence, as much as people might kind of dispute some of this. I think, there's so many opportunities to be able to start an activity or a conversation and to then encourage young people to go and have that with the other people that they engage with in life. And I think then, you've referenced some of these, doing things that engage young people in the political process and set them up as critical and engaged citizens, which may well then continue. And it may be, if they ever get involved in a planning process or responding to something on a local level, it might be that they then understand how who's responsible to represent them in the House of the Parliament and how they go through that process of voting for that. And all of this is kind of interconnected and linked. And I think what it also does is just highlight how complex all of this is, and it isn't just about the environment, that there really are so many strands that are interconnected. But that aspect of engaging in wider community and thinking about systemic change is really important. Can be a bit more challenging if you're not just telling people to turn off the lights or to recycle, but it's an important place to be as well. Rachel, is there anything else you wanted to say on that one?
Well, just a few success stories, really. There was a year six class who wrote letters to their local councillor around a climate emergency, again, referring to time in school some time ago. Last year at the Pecan Eco Fair, a lot of children made little canaries, decorated little canaries, and then wrote a postcard alongside it saying what they expected their new MP to do for the environment, which were dutifully sent and came back again. I had done a similar thing in a school in Chichester when Gillian Keegan was Education Secretary there, and she wrote them. She made a video response. Now, whether or not the response actually gets followed through, whether there's a change made, the very fact that the MP had listened and had received their stuff made the children feel really empowered. And this is something that was happening in primary school. One lot was a year six group. At the Eco Fair, you had children, who could barely write, actually writing these things. So I don't think that the political side and the using your voice and talking to other people isn't something that you have to leave for, sixth form or even teenagers. It's something that, it's very exciting for young children, even lower down.
Mm, yeah, definitely. What I might do then is just jump into a bit of a summary, and then if anyone else has got any questions or anything that comes up, do throw it in the chat. Otherwise, then maybe I'll come to you just back to you at the end, Rachel. Um, so I guess a key strand of what we're trying to communicate is that there is a wealth of opportunity, resource, support out there, and in one sense that can be overwhelming, and it can be difficult to kind of fully understand. If you start to use a framework like focusing on the curriculum, thinking about the local, involving a climate action plan, which schools are increasingly kind of expected to produce, and then also linking in any outdoor learning that you might already be doing, are ways that you can start to create a holistic framework to this. There's just a few of the organisations there on that slide, and we make reference to and have worked with all of these sorts of ones in our framework. Um, I'll send a link after this for you to be able to access the website. That's definitely something to dig into and explore in your own time. But the idea is there is a framework of 7 key themes. There's a logic to this, and you can start to use that to think, how does this map across our teaching? And then in terms of a journey, so rather than kind of haphazardly going about this, there's a logic to this in that you want to start by making sure that you have a kind of a common language and approach. Have you tied this into aims, wider aims of the school community? Is something like improving young people's well-being something that the school has recognised that they need to improve? Is it something that you could also use as a vehicle to improve engagement and actually more formal outcomes in terms of reading or writing? This can be a vehicle to be able to achieve that, to re-energize the curriculum and people's interest in that. Once you've done that, it might be that you then look to map this across your curriculum. And then you can use these templates and resources to be able to help do that, share that across the school community, get everyone to sort of input their bit. And then you can come back to them with well, this is what we're doing at the moment, and this is maybe where we could go to. And this is something then that you could present as part of a staff meeting, and you can create more of a journey off the back of it. And the next step would then be to actually start using some of the inspiration and resources. And again, you don't have to use it all. That's overwhelming in itself as well. There's no expectation that you suddenly overnight uh, put nature and the climate crisis across everything you're doing. What you need to do is recognize that it's the most sustainable thing is to start with one thing, to pick one kind of topic or one year group or one subject and use that as a vehicle to start opening up and doing more and more and more. It's a stepping stone. And that's also then where something like an eco day is a useful way to engage the full school community, to get everyone thinking about this. And it may be that there's still an opportunity to do this in the summer term. It may be this is something that you think about in 1st September, but there is support again out there for you. The last thing I just wanted to signpost is we have a WhatsApp community of teachers who you can put questions to, who share ideas and resources. We frame that by regions. So we've got a group of teachers within the Southeast who are linked that you might be interested in connecting with. But equally, there are so many other local organizations and networks. And as long as you're connected with one of them, I think, that's all that can be expected. And we've got Emma on the call, who's part of the Alton Climate Action Network and helping lead within that local area. We've obviously got Rachel and Pecan as well, who are helping to coordinate this. So just make sure that you tap into local network support, expertise, as well as that kind of the big national stuff as well. I'm going to stop there, Rachel. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we finish?
Nothing from me at the moment. In fact, I was going to say that obviously a huge thank you to you, Paul. Without this, we wouldn't be here if it were not for you. And I think that's a really useful steer, whilst also explaining to us that you don't have to do everything at once. The fact that there are 200 organisations with resources, you don't have to look through them all, but just maybe think, am I seeing this through an environmental lens when you approach a lesson plan, a scheme of work, or whatever? Just think, can I twist this? Can I look there first? So a big thank you, Paul, for doing that. I'd really like, if anybody has feedback on the session, please just drop me a line or drop education@petersfieldcan.org a line. And if you have further questions, then things that come up that you want to ask Paul particularly, again, either do that through the website, his website, the Ministry of Eco Education website, or do them via via us. And that's also, I'd really be very interested to know what other areas of environmental education or relevant stuff that you think Pecan might be able to help you with in CPD going forward. This is our first bit of CPD, and we hope it won't be the last. But overall, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Paul, for leading us so masterfully.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. I've dropped in the chat a link to the presentation, which also then links through to lots of things I've talked about. But we will follow up with an email as well afterwards. Sarah, was there anything you wanted to say? I've just seen that you've come on
I'll
there.
just say a huge thank you. We've got down about 6 things that we're going to go away and move forward, and with the help of Rachel and the team, it's been very, very useful. So thank you very much.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day or the evening.
Bye.